Hello, everybody. Welcome to the State of the Nation podcast. My name is Makoni Waramaja. Not your typical host. It's the festive season, and true to the very generous nature of the podcast, we've given Mike Sham another day off. But as per usual, my guest and I promised to make this show worth your while. So stick around. Subscribe if you haven't done so, like the video and share it around. Also, make sure to click the notification bell so that you can get notified whenever we release an episode. My guest today is the federal chairperson of the Democratic Alliance. Helen Zille is joining us today. Helen, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Makone. It's good to be with you and your viewers.
Let's start with this. I was curious to know whether the DA and the other non-ANC GNU parties found out, like the rest of us, in the news about the little shuffle we had in our cabinet recently, specifically of Minister Simelane, or is this a discussion that was had prior with the non-ANC parties within the GNU?
Not that I'm aware of. I don't think that the president discussed it with any of the other parties, because I think it was just a shuffle of the ANC representatives of the GNU. So the way I understand that it works is that the ANC has been allocated certain portfolios in terms of the GNU agreement, and they can put into those portfolios who the leader sees fit.
So I understand that these are ANC portfolios that were being moved around in the sort of musical chairs fashion, but I would still imagine that the Democratic Alliance, the IFP, and the other parties would be consulted, because you would know that that's how the ANC would typically operate with its alliance partners, right? The SACP, for example, would often be consulted whenever cabinet reshuffles were occurring. But I also think this sort of gives us a bit of an insight into the inner workings of the GNU and the level of cooperation within the GNU, because, of course, the movement of one minister, alleged corrupt minister, from one portfolio to another is still a reflection on the rest of you, including the Democratic Alliance. What's your position on what should have been done with Minister Simelane?
Yes, that's why we were very critical of that reshuffle. The president doesn't have to consult us when he chooses various ANC people to be in particular ministries, but that also leaves us free to criticize it very strongly, which is exactly what we did. We do not believe that Minister Simelane, while it seems to be common cause, and certainly there's been no denial of the fact that she got a hefty loan from VBS at the time to start a coffee shop that didn't work. And while that is still being looked into and being cleared up, there is no basis on which the president can move her from justice to human settlements. So the bottom line is this, that we were highly critical of it. So the president can move whichever ANC ministers he likes into the position. We can criticize them.
Okay, sticking on to this point about corruption, the DA's position on Phala Phala seems to have migrated. Previously, I believe that you had said that you would not vote to impeach the president, that you would not support a motion of no confidence, but it seems that you have come around to a position held by Glenis Breitenbach within the DA, as well as Solly Malatse, that you would be pursuing Phala Phala. But you've also said that you have other mechanisms of raising concerns now that you're within government. What is the DA's position now on Phala Phala, and is it something that you're mooting within the GNU itself? Is it something that the clearinghouse will have to decide on, or should we just wait for the other small parties, primarily from the Progressive Caucus, to escalate the issue of Phala Phala?
I have to laugh when you say Progressive Caucus. They're the very opposite of progressive. They are 100% regressive. They would take South Africa to a totalitarian state and a collapsed economy. So the abuse of the word progressive really gets up my nose, I'm afraid, because progressive has a positive connotation. And if that group of parties get into power, it'll be night and over for South Africa's economy. So they're the very opposite of progressive. That's the first point. The second point is that the law must take its course on Phala Phala, and we've always said that. And we're not in charge of the criminal justice system, unfortunately, but we've always supported the law taking its course.
And so you've come around to the issue of Phala Phala. Should it be...
We haven't come around to anything. That's always been our position.
No, I believe you had earlier said in June that you would not vote to, you would not support a motion of no confidence against the president. Let me ask you this straightforward. Should that vote be put to Parliament again, how would the DA vote? Would you vote to support the president's impeachment?
Letting the course of justice run its course is very different from a motion of no confidence in Parliament. They're totally different processes. The one is a political process, the other one is a criminal justice process.
Sure, but ultimately, if the court ruled that the Parliament should have to vote again, right, that's where it will ultimately lead. So while the two processes are concurrent in that the court would have to decide and then it will go back to Parliament, my question to you now is, if it is returned to Parliament, how would the Democratic Alliance vote?
That is a hypothetical question. The court must first run its course, and it's not for me to decide. I'm not in government. I'm not a spokesman for the GNU. I am running the DA as a party and managing the interface between the politicians and the organization, but I'm not in there, and the people who would have to decide are the people in the DA caucus. So it's not for me to decide. What I decide is actually irrelevant here.
Okay, so ultimately you would let the DA MPs vote according to conscience, and there wouldn't be one resolution that the party would expect their members of parliament to vote according with.
No, I didn't say that at all. I said the DA's caucus will take that decision. And when a caucus takes a decision, it is binding on every member of the caucus.
Okay, all right. Are you privy to the latest investigation results from the Amabungane about the NPA? It seems they've made damning accusations about government that you are now a part of, that the NPA has not been efficacious. Well, we know that the NPA hasn't been effective in pursuing the criminal cases at its disposal. But what do you make of the Amabungane investigation?
Into what?
Into the effectiveness of the NPA and whether or not there's actual will to pursue those cases.
Well, I have absolutely no idea what Amabungane has said. I don't read the Daily Maverick for very clear reasons. And I don't believe what the media says anyway until I get confirmation separately. I don't really believe what anybody says. I've had too many bad experiences.
Okay, fair enough. More to this point about cooperation within the GNU, the clearinghouse mechanism as an operation of resolving disputes within the GNU, how have you found the test that it has now been subject to, primarily through the Bela bill? You were supposed to have arrived at a resolution, well, the members' cabinet was supposed to have arrived at its decision yesterday. But give us a bit of insight, peel back the curtain into the operation or how the clearinghouse operates and how it decides on those various points of contention, from the Bela to the NHI all the way up to the expropriation bill.
Well, there's not much I can say because it is a confidential meeting. But what I am free to say is that I think that the mechanism is working well. I do think that all parties are allowed to state their case. I do think that the state law advisor has been given very good advice and has been unpacking the legislation that needs to be, and the court cases that need to be understood. And I do believe the Secretariat has been doing a good job. So I think the mechanism has been working, but let's see what the outcome thereof is.
Have you found that the Democratic Alliance has been able to influence government outside of those contentious bills or acts, including the NHI and the Bela? So, for example, have you been able to get any laws passed since you've been in government, or even other avenues of just influencing government decision-making?
Well, that happens within the government. And as I say, I'm not a member of the GNU. I said before this meeting that I could not speak about the GNU, and I've made it clear in all the podcasts that I am not a spokesperson for the GNU and I'm not in the GNU. But this government has only been in office since May, and it takes a very long time to pass legislation. We have draft bills before the Parliament, excuse me. The most crucial are the threshold legislation bills that we've got and the various ones relating to the management of coalitions. Those we've got there, but they have gone to the various committees now. They're in process, but it's too early to say that we have passed any of those laws yet because it takes much longer than that in Parliament.
Well, I'm asking, when I speak about influence of the Democratic Alliance, I'm not necessarily speaking about you as an individual because you're not in the GNU, but I mean the Democratic Alliance's policy positions. There's been some discontent, I believe, among DA supporters, perhaps a fringe percentage of DA supporters, that the DA has been co-opted into the GNU, and in a way that the sting out of the Democratic Alliance has been subdued. So that's why I ask you about whether or not you have found that you're able to influence government decision-making and government policy. So not necessarily asking about you, the individual, but the Democratic Alliance and its policies.
Can you give me an example as to where anybody could draw the conclusion that we'd been co-opted?
So this example is just read from comment sections of podcasts, for example. This is
why I don't have any confidence in this, because people make big assertions and they can't bring a single example to the table.
No, there are examples. Let's discuss John Steenhuisen, for example. People feel that with him joining government and him being a part of government, he hasn't been able to actually pursue some of those policy objectives of the Democratic Alliance, but also that he has neglected his role as a leader within the DA, right? Whereas there are other shining examples of DA ministers who are in cabinet who are still able to get things done, right? Your Leon Schreibers of the world, perhaps even Minister Gwarube, even though she's had obviously dealt with the most conflict within the GNU at present. But there are definitely runctions among DA supporters, and to deny that outright, I think, would be not to confront some of the grievances people have with the DA and whether or not it has been co-opted, whether it can actually continue to hold liberal principles and liberal values without selling out.
You're making sweeping assertions without a single concrete example to back up your claim. So, for example, if you look at the NHI, how strongly we have opposed that, how absolutely firmly our Deputy Minister of Finance drew the line under going into deficit budgeting for the NHI. You have ignored the incredible task of getting a debt anchor into the budget. You have ignored the extraordinary fight we've put up on the Bella Bill. You've ignored all of the issues that we have taken a very clear position on and continue to criticize the ANC on. The people who are supposed to be and are holding the ANC and our whole government to account are our members of parliament, because that is the accountability mechanism, and the DA in parliament continues to do this. So if you can give an example of where the DA has sold out to the ANC and give me a concrete example of exactly where that has happened, I will answer the question. But to have these broad general assertions from what is put onto the comment section of a podcast on Twitter, that's why we can't believe what the media says anymore, because they pick up this kind of nonsense, state it as a fact, without any concrete evidence.
No, I wasn't stating it as a fact, right? I was gathering sentiment from the public, right, of which social media is a valuable object of doing that, gathering that sentiment and putting it to you to respond as to what you make of those assertions by people online who claim to be DA supporters and express discontent with how the DA has been operating within the GNU. But let's move on to this.
I will deal with facts, not sentiments.
All right, let's move on to this. The DA had previously lamented or even attempted to have its own, make its own appointments of DGs, right? People who are typically cadre employees into the government, because it felt that there would be conflict in how it's able to operate its governments if it still has employees from an ANC government. From what are you hearing from members within cabinet of the Democratic Alliance about those relationships within those DGs that it has inherited from ANC-led governments?
As I've mentioned, I can't talk about the GNU because I'm not in the GNU. But from what I've heard is it's a mixed bag. Some DGs are very committed to the democratic process, which says that if the people vote in a certain way, and if you get a new minister representing a certain party, then your job is to implement, not argue. And there are a lot of people who are doing that, and there's some that aren't.
And what would the DA's markers of success be within the GNU? We understand that you are pro-growth, pro-job creation, bring an end to the levels of corruption. But what are specific items that people can hold the DA to account at the end of the GNU to assess whether or not you have actually met your own objectives of success within government?
Well, everything we're going to do in government is going to be related to growing the economy and getting people into jobs. That is the number one priority of South Africa, number one above all else. And everything we do and all our priorities are geared towards making it easier for people to get a job and to keep a job and to make it easier for investors to create jobs. That is what we need to do. Now we are hoping, and we're going to measure ourselves against the yardstick of, did growth go up and did unemployment come down? We're not going to solve the unemployment crisis in 5 years. We're not going to solve it in 10 years. No one is. But what we've got to see is whether we can move the dial in the right direction. That is the most important thing.
And where are you hoping to see debt in the end by the end of the GNU? We understand that the debt to GDP ratio is quite high. There's also escalating debt servicing costs, which are eating into many line items of government expenditure, taking away from government's ability to provide critical services in education and in health and in just upkeep of infrastructure at large. But where are you hoping to see or to move those numbers by the end of the GNU government?
Well, the ANC's corruption chickens are coming home to roost, and you can't loot the state by 1.5 trillion rand in 5 years and expect there not to be some very, very painful medicine. And the DA are the people who are prepared to take the pain. And it is very, very painful to get a debt anchor and to have debt stabilization and to have a spending review. And all of these things we're very committed to. Now, obviously, we do our very best to defend frontline services, because frontline services should not suffer because the ANC has looted the state and because our debt to GDP ratio is growing and because the government cannot fund a deficit anymore and is using borrowed money to fund operational expenditure. That is totally unsustainable. And it is that the DA is having to have a lot of courage to prevent. And while we stabilize debt, we're going to take a lot of flack, but it has to happen if we want to make sure that our economy doesn't collapse.
But where are you hoping to see those ratios, specifically with debt to GDP? I believe that it's estimated to climb all the way up to 77%. Where are you hoping to move the needle to? And up till when it gets to a certain percentage, will you, as the Democratic Alliance, be satisfied that perhaps now we can start focusing on other areas within government?
Well, we're focusing on many areas simultaneously. We don't only focus on one issue at a time, but different ministers focus on different things. And certainly in budget time, our Deputy Minister of Finance, Ashok Sarupan, focuses very, very strongly on debt stabilization so we don't go bankrupt, and ensuring that we can fund our budgets, which is very, very difficult. So I think the right ratio for us would be around 70%, but certainly not 77%.
All right. One of the things you took to doing immediately after the GNU was formed is penning almost a autobiographical account into some of the ways in which the negotiations were operating. I specifically remember you mentioning your son telling you about version control and your inability to operate the different documents and drafts that you were working on at the time, which I found to be very insightful. But outside of that, and maybe even the statement of intent, it's still not clear to the rest of South Africa what the plan is for economic growth, right? That seems to be the tagline for the GNU. But what exactly is the plan for economic growth? We understand that job creation is on the line, and you said that you can manage multiple things at the same time. But when will the GNU articulate its plan for growth and hopefully get buy-in from the rest of the country?
Well, we must all accept that jobs are primarily created by the private sector. And jobs are a consequence of confidence in the government and the future of the country. And when that confidence exists, people with good ideas and capital start businesses and employ people. And so our government's job must be to create the conditions in which that can happen. If I look at Cape Town and the Western Cape, you will see what I mean. People can have confidence that there will be clean water, that there will be electricity, that the roads won't be filled with potholes, that they will be able to send their children to good schools, that healthcare will work in the public and the private sector, that their refuse will be removed, that the sewage will be flushed away without polluting the water sources, that the environment will be clean, and that government will be stable, and that policies will be designed to encourage investment. And that has now been going on for almost 20 years. In 2026, we will have been in office in Cape Town implementing those policies for 20 years. And that creates a virtuous cycle. So we are having a boom in Cape Town and the Western Cape as people move to the province, as people invest in the province, as people create jobs in the province, as visitors come to the province, because everything works. And everything works because there is a competent, corruption-free government. That does not mean we don't have individual corruption scandals, but when we do in the DA, we act and we get rid of people, not in the ANC. So people have confidence that where the DA governs, things will be stable and things will work. And when that happens, you have investment, growth, and jobs. That is what you are seeing as a culmination of 20 years of DA governance. And as large parts of the country have water shutdowns for long periods, Gauteng, KwaZulu-Natal, Mpumalanga, the Free State. In Cape Town, we're investing record sums in our infrastructure. A, because we didn't steal the money, and B, because we've been investing steadily into maintenance since 2006. And that is the consequence of a virtuous cycle of good governance.
And will the GNU be taking a leaf out of the Democratic Alliance's path to job creation in the Western Cape? But more so, when will the plan for job creation and economic growth, as you so well articulate, be communicated to the rest of the public? Because again, outside of the statement of intent, it's still not clear exactly what the plan for the GNU is in terms of growing the economy, in terms of closing the gap that many of the disadvantaged are left out of in economic participation. When will the parties within the GNU get the public in on what their plan is for growth and job creation?
Well, we've just had the medium-term budget policy statement, which is exactly the platform in which that is articulated. So go and read Enoch Godongwana's speech there. Go and read what Deputy Minister Ashel Sarupin has been saying. That is the platform. It is debt stabilization. It is a spending review. It is to get a funded budget, and it is to eradicate corruption from the system. That is the first thing you've got to do. And then you have to get competent people in key positions to be able to govern properly, to create a virtuous cycle. And as I say, to get peak benefit of that, you have to have been doing that for 20 years. We have to turn around a government that is completely and utterly broken through corruption, through mismanagement, through cadre deployment. If you look at Johannesburg, and my heart bleeds because I was born in Johannesburg and I'm very committed to Johannesburg, it is so broken that it's going to take us at least 10 years to stabilize and fix if voters are sensible enough to put in a DA mayor there. So it's going to be absolutely critical for us to start by fixing the basics, by getting the right people in the right positions, by stopping corruption, and by putting the resources where they need to be.
What do you think the Democratic Alliance's future is within the city of Johannesburg, but also in Gauteng metros at large? You have often said that the voters know what to do and that the option is clear, that they should vote for the Democratic Alliance. And yet we're not seeing the booming support which indicate that people are indeed shifting, although I think there was a huge improvement in the last election, but still not enough to get the DA above that majority line. What is the future of the Democratic Alliance in Gauteng metros? And also, what do you make of what happened in the city of Tshwane?
Well, in the Gauteng as a whole in this last election, we were just 6 percentage points behind the ANC, which is very, very close. And if the people who had voted for BOSA and RISE and Action and all those other tiny parties had consolidated behind the DA, we would have been bigger than the ANC. So the important thing is for us to consolidate. The ANC is coming apart. It has been driven apart between the various factions. What voters need to do is consolidate behind the DA. You don't have to love us. You just have to know that we govern well and that we're not corrupt. And that if you want your city to stop falling down a bottomless pit, you need to start making the decision for good, corruption-free governance and capacity in the right places. And you have to start the long and difficult process of rebuilding. But in a democracy, that is up to the voters. And the voters are going to have to make that decision. We can't make it for them. We can just offer them the best candidates we can find. We can offer them a good plan, which we've implemented in Cape Town and in Midvaal and in Umgeni and in Kucha and in a whole range of other local authorities where we govern. And people are welcome to go and look at those local authorities, look at the record of those local authorities, look at what statistics South Africa says, what the annual household survey says. You'll see that in all of the DA-governed municipalities, things are getting a lot better. We're all investing in infrastructure in DA's municipalities. We pay our bill to Eskom, so Eskom doesn't cut us off. We fix our water leaks, so we don't lose more water than we use. We do all of those things. And if you want that story in Johannesburg, people know what to do. We tell them every election, in the end, it is their choice.
Does the DA want to govern those Gauteng metros? I know you've dismissed public sentiment outright, but I still think there's still some value here because with, for example, former Mayor Phala and even Mayor Zille, there was an impression from the outside looking in that perhaps those mayors were not supported sufficiently by the party for them to be able to retain their positions as mayor. What do you make of that? Was the DA fully supportive of Zille retaining his position as mayor? There didn't seem to be many statements issued from higher up within the party when the motion of no confidence was being mooted.
First of all, I do take sentiments very seriously. They're important in politics. But in the end, people must make a choice. Do they want to fix their city or don't they? Simple choice. That's the first point. The second point is, you say there doesn't seem to have been support from the center for Brink. We did whatever we possibly could to support those mayors. And in the end, it had nothing to do with the party that they were voted out of office.
Would you say that of Mpho Phalatse as well? I believe that Gayton McKenzie has previously said that it was only in the last minute that the DA was willing to give up a portfolio to keep him in alliance and in support of the then Rainbow Coalition led government.
I don't know what that means. The bottom line is we were not prepared to put Kenny Kunene into a critical portfolio, which was a tender-rich portfolio, and we knew exactly what was going to happen. We're not prepared to be part of governments that see government as transactional and opportunities to tap into capital flows. We're not prepared to do that. There's a bridge on which we're not prepared to cross, and that was one of them.
Okay. I think when you say you don't know what that means, perhaps I should clarify. I think the idea is that, and my interpretation of what people mean when they say that the DA is arrogant or the DA is greedy. You even had MMC Vuiswa Ramokgopa say that most recently, is that the DA is not willing to do whatever it takes to keep its mayors in government, up to and including giving up key portfolios. And so that was what Gayton McKenzie was alleging at the time of Mayor Phalatse's term, that it was only in the last minute that you were willing to offer him a position that you had previously given him, but when it was time to dole it out, that you had withheld it. So I hope that clarifies that. And perhaps you can also speak to that, the idea that the DA is greedy, that came out during the GPU negotiations with Gauteng, with Premier Lessufi.
There's so many issues tied up in that particular question that let me unpack them. Firstly, there's a fundamental contradiction in saying that we're prepared to give up a mayoralty because we're greedy. That is a fundamental contradiction. Of course, we have certain principles and values, and we stand up for them. And we would like to have a mayor, but we're not prepared to sacrifice our core values and principles to grab the mayoralty. So for me, that seems to be the opposite of greedy, and it seems to be the opposite of arrogant. Being principled is not to be arrogant. We don't accept some of the power plays that other parties enter into or want to enter into, which does not make us arrogant. It makes us principled. And we have our principles and we stand by our principles, which someone has to in this very complex political space. Then it's a very easy and cheap argument to use if you haven't got any other argument to call someone arrogant or racist. And of course, immediately the media love it because they don't have to understand the issues. They just use the biggest slur that's been said, bit of clickbait there. Zille is a racist, Zille is arrogant, this and that and the next thing. Instead of actually just digging to see what the facts are and analyzing the facts, they take the slur and the insult that is thrown around and substitute that for a proper analysis of the story. So that's become the rule in our politics, where people can't argue their case. They just hurl an insult. And then the media very obligingly just picks up that insult. So we don't go along with that. Then it's hilarious to hear you say that we were greedy in the Gauteng negotiation. I mean, just do the maths. We were 6 percentage points behind the ANC, 6 percentage points. There were 13 positions on offer. They wanted to give us 3 non-entity portfolios out of 30 and keep the rest for the ANC. Who's being greedy? They wanted to give us e-government, environment, and agriculture in Gauteng. They wouldn't give us education, they wouldn't give us health, and we were just slightly smaller than them. So who's being greedy? You see, that's exactly the point that I'm making. The Sufi can throw out the allegation that we're greedy. The media pick it up without any interrogation. It's a nice bit of clickbait, and out it goes. We would have been selling out completely if we had accepted Lesufi's terms. So on the one hand, today you put it to me that we've been selling out. On the other hand, you put it to me that we're being greedy. In Gauteng, we were simply saying this is our due. Lesufi refused to meet it because he knew what we would uncover if we got serious portfolios to which we were entitled by the election result. So we were acting with integrity, in good faith, according to a fair formula, and he wanted to keep us out at all costs. And he wanted the result when he didn't have the DA in government. That's exactly what he wanted.
I still think it's worthwhile to put to those assertions made by leaders of other political parties for you to settle the dispute on. And that's one that's important. I think that the share of agriculture in Gauteng as a province is actually relatively small. And so even though you were 6 points behind the ANC, it's still not an equitable distribution of power. But I do want to put one of Lesufi's contentions with the Bella Bill to you, which is that he would be putting into effect a court judgment that's basically said that it should be up to government bureaucrats to decide on that the ultimate decision, the final decision, should rest with them on what school admission policy is. And I would like to hear your arguments on that, because I think that the arguments for Bella often get bogged down into just language policy, which I think is narrow, but also into race, which again, I think it's narrow because, as we all know, there are more, for example, colored-speaking Afrikaans people in South Africa than there are white Afrikaans-speaking individuals in South Africa. But what is your response to that? That the Bella Bill is bringing into effect a court judgment that said that the final word on what the admission policies for schools should be should rest with the government rather than with the school governing bodies and with parents.
Which court judgment?
So I'm actually not aware of the court judgment specifically, but that's been the argument made by the Premier.
Well, I'm sure he's also not aware of the court judgments. There are three in specific. There's the Ermelo court judgment, there's the Rivonia court judgment, and there's the Reshuffle court judgment. And all of them, and some went to the Constitutional Court, in which it became perfectly clear that the court says there has to be a balance. There has to be a balance between the rights of parents and governing bodies and the Department of Education and schools as a whole. And that balance is critical to maintain. What we're arguing is that Bella completely topples that balance over and puts it squarely in the hands of the head of department. And Lesufi and Chilwani, his MEC for Education, has made it very, very clear that there's no need for a single Afrikaans medium school to exist in Gauteng. So they've made it clear how they're going to use that act. They're not going to use that act to get a balance between the different rights in education. They're going to use it as part of their revenge project against Afrikaans. That's what is going down here. And the evidence is what they themselves have said. Chilwani has said that there's no need for a single Afrikaans medium school in Gauteng. Lesufi, who also wants grade ones to fix fridges and irons, apparently, according to his statement that he made recently about multi-certification, when he can't even get them to learn to read, but we'll leave that there. Lesufi has said quite openly that he sees this as a continuation of the 1976 uprising, and that the entire point is that Black children don't want to learn in Afrikaans. They don't have to learn in Afrikaans. No one has to learn in Afrikaans. But nowhere has it ever been said, and it's in fact unconstitutional to say, that no one may learn in Afrikaans.
Let's come back to your views on the Progressive Caucus. You said earlier that you chuckle as you hear of the words Progressive Caucus, that it's anything but progressive and that it is in fact regressive. But you've also said that the fact that the EFF has been losing key members within its higher ranks should not be comforting to anyone, because that there are still many people in South Africa who identify deeply with the ideology of the EFF. What is the alternative to the Progressive Caucus? I would imagine that it was the Rainbow Coalition, but it seems that the members of that coalition have scattered. Some are in government, some are not. But what would the alternative to the Progressive Caucus be?
Well, I don't know what the Progressive Caucus claims to stand for, but I do know what the EFF and MK stand for. And they stand for a political system in which the leader controls the party controls the state, and the state controls the economy. That is totalitarianism, and it is the exact opposite of progressive. The alternative to that is what the DA stands for: constitutionalism, non-racialism, the rule of law, a market economy, and accountable leadership. So those are the two opposite poles in our society. One is represented by the EFF and now MK as well, and the other is represented by the DA, and the ANC falls somewhere in the middle, and some people in the ANC tend more towards the DA's vision, and other people in the ANC tend more towards the EFF-MK vision.
Is there a future for the Rainbow Coalition?
What is the Rainbow Coalition? I've never heard of it.
That's the coalition, the Moonshot Pact, that a few of the then opposition, some are now in government, so no longer opposition, had coalesced around creating an opposition to the ANC government.
Well, you've got to get some votes in order for that to have a future. Now, the DA grew in the last election, and I'm not sure if any other parties in the Moonshot Pact grew. So if you want a future for that kind of coalition, you have to grow your voter base.
Okay, so it seems there's no future there. And how is the GPU in the province of KwaZulu-Natal operating? What do you make of the power share there, primarily led by the IFP, and what strides have you been able to make in that province?
Well, I must confess that I don't know the full detail. I do know that we've got our MEC for finance there, who's trying to cut out corruption and get a grip on the finances, which is a very important and a good thing. And we've got our MEC for public works there, who's trying to come to grips with the construction mafia, which is an essential thing. So these are all things we're trying to do with not too much leverage, because we also did not get up to 20% of the vote in KwaZulu-Natal. So the biggest party in the coalition was the IFP, and then there was the ANC, and then there was us, and then there was the NFP. So it is a four-party coalition, which is obviously complex and difficult to manage, but the premier is the IFP, as it should be, and we are doing our best to hold it together, and we're doing our very best to bring our path through our portfolios.
All right. And lastly, I'd like to get your reflections on the leadership styles of President Ramaphosa as you've experienced him now within government, and someone like Jacob Zuma, who you've spoken of highly as an individual, less so as a president. But it would still be interesting to hear what you make of their two differing leadership styles.
Well, Cyril Ramaphosa is a facilitative leader. He likes to move things along to consensus, and that certainly has its place in politics. And when you have a very divided party, it's often the best way to go, which he has, a very, very divided party. Jacob Zuma's leadership style is completely hands-off, as long as he can get his cadres deployed into every single position so that he can control them for purposes of corruption and extraction. And that is his leadership style. Now, he's a very pleasant person and charming person on a one-on-one basis, but he's deeply corrupt. And he sees being in office as a license to loot.
All right, there you have it, folks. That was Helen Zille, the federal chairperson of the Democratic Alliance. She's given you her perspective on what's occurring within the GNU, even though she herself is not within the GNU. But we've also been able to test some of the public sentiment about the GNU to the DA itself. You decide, you make your minds up about what she's had to say today. But do remember to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share it around. But also stick around for future episodes of the State of the Nation podcast. Thank you and goodbye.